In the dead of night, a car pulls into a quiet gas station. The door opens, and a golden retriever is pushed out into the cold rain. No goodbye. No explanation. Just red taillights vanishing into the mist. But what this dog does next, how he chooses to stay, to protect, and to heal, will leave a town forever changed. Stay with us, because this is not just a story about being abandoned, it's about being found in the most unexpected way. Birchwood, Oregon, was the kind of place where time moved a little slower, especially on nights like this, early autumn, when the pines shivered in the wind and the rain fell in slow, thoughtful drops. The sky was dark with low-hanging clouds, smothering the stars and blanketing the sleepy town in a kind of silence that made you pause before speaking. On the edge of town, where the moss crept up the signposts and a rusting soda machine leaned tiredly outside a lone gas station, a car pulled in quietly beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights. It was almost midnight. The vehicle, a faded blue sedan with a crack across the rear window, rolled to a stop near Pump 3. Its engine hummed low, like a secret it didn't want to share. The back door opened slowly, as if reluctant, and then came the movement, a soft shove, and a golden shape tumbled out onto the damp concrete. The golden retriever was large and well-fed, with thick cream-colored fur that curled slightly at the ears. He stood quickly, confused, his deep brown eyes wide with alarm. His name was Rusty, though the people in the car never said it out loud. At 6 years old, he had known both comfort and love once, but now he stood alone, the rubber of his paw pads slick on the wet pavement. He turned, tried to jump back in, but the door slammed. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just the red glow of taillights as the car pulled away and melted into the rain-drenched highway. Rusty remained still for a long moment. The mist clung to his fur, turning it darker in patches. His ears perked with every sound, the rattling of wind, the distant hum of tires, but nothing was familiar. And then, quietly, he sat down beside the gas station door, his tail curled around his paws, staring toward the road as if sheer willpower might make the car return. Inside the gas station, Earl Jenkins rubbed the back of his neck as he bent over an old heater that refused to blow warm air. 64 years old with shoulders slightly stooped from years of hard work, Earl had the weathered hands of a mechanic and the soft voice of a widower. His flannel shirt, once red, now faded into a hue somewhere between rust and memory, was tucked into worn jeans that sagged slightly at the hips. A few gray tufts curled out from under his beanie, and his eyes, a faded green, carried the weary patience of a man who had seen loss and made peace with silence. He'd run the Birchwood station for 22 years, ever since his wife, Diane, passed in a traffic accident on Route 16, the same road that curved past his shop. Earl didn't mind the quiet. It gave him space to remember. But when he heard a soft scratching at the glass door, followed by the heavy sigh of a dog settling against it, he stood up, groaning slightly, and walked over. Rusty didn't look up at first. He was soaked, his golden coat matted in places where the rain had gathered in pools. Earl squinted, then opened the door a crack. The dog flinched slightly, but didn't move away. "Well," Earl muttered, his voice a gravelly murmur, "you look like someone forgot how to be decent." The golden retriever lifted his head, made eye contact, and then turned back to the road. Earl crouched slowly, knees popping. He extended a hand, fingers open. Rusty sniffed them, gave no growl, no bark, just a quiet huff through his nose. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Earl whispered, as though the night might break if he spoke too loud. He stood again, shuffled inside, and returned with a dented metal bowl filled with water. A moment later, he added a half sandwich wrapped in wax paper, the one he'd saved from his dinner. Rusty sniffed the offerings but didn't touch them. His gaze remained fixed on the direction his family had gone. Earl watched him for a long while, arms folded. "Some people," he muttered, shaking his head. Then, his fingers brushed the envelope that had arrived earlier that day, a thick, cream-colored card inviting him to a high school reunion. 40 years gone. It was signed in neat cursive by a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years, Helen McAllister. A girl he once danced with under the gym lights before life took them in different directions. He placed the invitation on the counter and looked back at Rusty. "You've been left behind too, huh?" he asked, not expecting an answer. The dog lay down beside the door, curled tightly, eyes never leaving the road. The rain picked up again around 3 a.m., tapping its fingers against the station windows and humming through the pine needles outside. Earl stayed in the back room, checking inventory he didn't really need to check, but kept peeking through the window. Rusty hadn't moved. Not once. As dawn began to pull back the curtain of night, the light shifted subtly over the gas station, painting everything in soft gray. A bird chirped, tentative. Rusty stood, stretched slowly, and padded a few steps toward the road, his movements stiff from the cold. Earl came outside with a second sandwich. "Still waiting?" he asked. Rusty sat and wagged his tail once, a small sign of acknowledgement. Earl smiled for the first time in days. "Well, you can wait here as long as you need, friend. I'll keep the light on." Inside, the heater finally sputtered to life, spreading warmth through the tiny building. Earl looked again at the envelope on the counter, then at the golden figure outside who had chosen this place, this door, as his vigil post. That morning, a girl on a school bus would see the dog and press her nose to the window. A boy would take a picture and post it online with the words, "Left but loyal." And far away, Helen McAllister would open an email from an old classmate saying, "You remember Earl Jenkins? He's still at that station. Got a dog now. Looks like a good one." And Rusty, soaked and silent, would wait a little longer, until something unexpected called him from the woods. The next morning in Birchwood was quiet and cold. Mist coiled in from the foothills, curling around fences and road signs like ghosts reluctant to let go of the night. The sun fought to break through, but the clouds held strong. The trees along the edge of the forest stood still, watching. The town woke slowly, one blinking neon sign, one cup of coffee at a time. At Birchwood Station, Rusty still sat by the door. His coat was less soaked now, but the fur remained matted and heavy with the previous night's rain. A shallow puddle had formed near his paws, and his breath curled visibly in the cold air. His eyes remained locked on the highway, the way a soldier watches the horizon. Inside, Earl Jenkins poured himself a cup of stale gas station coffee. He wore the same flannel shirt, now buttoned all the way up, and a dark brown vest over it. His expression was unreadable. He kept glancing through the window, checking if the dog had left, but part of him already knew the answer. Rusty wasn't going anywhere. The bell above the door jingled faintly at 7:20 a.m., and Earl turned around. A girl walked in, dragging a bright blue backpack twice the size of her small frame. She was maybe 10 years old, with a mop of curly dark blonde hair, freckles scattered across her pale cheeks like snowflakes, and a puffy green coat with one sleeve slightly torn. Her name was Maddie Carson. Maddie was sharp in the way children are when life hasn't made them cynical yet but has taught them not to fully trust smiles. She was the daughter of Donna Carson, a single mom who worked 2 jobs and barely had time to make breakfast. Most mornings, Maddie waited for the school bus in front of the gas station while Donna picked up extra shifts at the bakery. "Hi, Mr. Jenkins," she chirped, pushing her hood down and stomping snowflakes off her sneakers. "Morning, Maddie. Hot chocolate's fresh, well, as fresh as that machine gets." She gave a small grin and walked over to the beverage counter. But before she poured anything, she stopped short, her gaze drawn toward the glass front door. Her brown eyes widened. "Is that a dog?" she asked, pressing both palms to the window. Earl didn't answer right away. He watched her face, the way her expression shifted between awe and worry. Then he said, "Was here last night. Got dropped off." "Dropped off?" She turned sharply. "Like, someone left him?" "Looks that way," Earl said, setting his coffee down and walking over. "Been sittin' there all night. Barely ate anything." Maddie opened the door halfway. Rusty turned his head slowly, his eyes flicking toward her, curious but cautious. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Rusty's ears twitched. He didn't wag, didn't back away. Just looked. His face had a softness that children recognized, the kind of sorrow they instinctively trusted. "Can I pet him?" she asked, glancing back at Earl. He hesitated. "Don't know him yet. Might be nervous." But Maddie had already stepped closer, crouching near the dog, her hands open and resting on her knees. "Hi, buddy," she said gently. "I'm Maddie." Rusty sniffed the air, tilted his head, but didn't move. Then, slowly, his tail gave a single wag, barely more than a twitch, but enough. Earl watched from the doorway, something warming quietly behind his ribs. As the school bus rumbled into view, Maddie stood up reluctantly. "You'll look after him, right, Mr. Jenkins?" "I'll try," Earl nodded. "Go on now. Bus won't wait." She waved and darted off. The bus driver, a tall man in a worn baseball cap, gave Earl a nod. Earl nodded back, but his mind wasn't on buses anymore. Later that morning, while stocking the soda fridge, Earl caught himself staring at the folded invitation on the counter again. Helen McAllister. That name stirred something old and quiet inside him. They hadn't spoken since graduation, but her handwriting hadn't changed. The letters curved upward like they were trying to rise above something. He was pulled from the thought by a soft sound, scraping nails against the door. Rusty had stood and was peering toward the forest now, ears perked. He let out a low, curious huff. Earl followed the dog's gaze. "What is it?" he asked aloud. But there was only the wind and the whisper of dry leaves dragging across the pavement. He stepped outside, pulling his vest tighter. "Ain't nothin' in those woods but squirrels and bad memories." Rusty didn't seem convinced. He took 2 steps toward the tree line, paused, then circled back and sat down again. That afternoon, a few townsfolk passed by and noticed the dog. One man, a tourist with a camera slung around his neck, took a photo and muttered something about loyalty in the rain. Earl didn't care for gawkers. He cared even less for pity. Later, as the light began to fade, Maddie returned with her mother in their dusty silver hatchback. Donna Carson was a wiry woman in her early 30s, with tired eyes and a kind face. She wore her exhaustion like a badge and kept her long brown hair tied back in a practical braid. "Evenin', Earl," she said. "Maddie told me about the dog." "He's still here," Earl replied. "Ain't budged much." Donna looked at Rusty, who sat quietly near the air pump now, watching the road with that same haunted patience. "He doesn't look like a stray," she said. "Looks like someone gave up." Maddie crouched again, holding a piece of her grilled cheese sandwich out. Rusty sniffed it but didn't eat. He gently nudged it with his nose toward the girl, then looked away. "That's so sad," Maddie murmured. Donna sighed. "We can't take in a dog right now, Maddie. You know that." "I know," she said softly. "But maybe he needs someone to just sit with him." Donna glanced at Earl, who nodded. "She's safe. He's gentle." Maddie sat down cross-legged, sandwich untouched beside her, and Rusty inched just slightly closer. As the sun sank behind the pine trees, casting the sky in bruised purple and soft gold, Earl leaned on the station doorframe, watching the two of them, the little girl and the big, loyal dog, both too young to understand why some people leave and others stay. Inside, the heater kicked on again, humming warm air through the narrow vents. Earl turned toward the counter, reached for the envelope again, and this time, he opened it. The third day after Rusty's arrival dawned in a hush. Birchwood was blanketed in a silver fog that blurred the line between road and forest. The dew sat thick on the pine needles, and every sound, the crunch of gravel under Earl's boots, the distant rumble of an early truck, felt padded, muffled by the morning's breath. Rusty was no longer a mystery to the locals. People who stopped for fuel would point to him and whisper to their passengers. A few left bits of food or treats near the station door. Children sometimes came by with sketchbooks and crayons, drawing him curled near the faded red ice cooler. But Rusty remained aloof, polite but distant. His trust, it seemed, was something to be earned. Earl had started keeping a folded blanket near the gas station's porch where Rusty chose to sleep. It was one of Diane's old quilts, something Earl had kept stored in a cedar chest for years. He wasn't sure why he brought it out, but something in Rusty's quiet patience had stirred an old ache in his chest, the kind that called for softness. That morning, Earl leaned on the porch railing with a mug of lukewarm coffee in hand. His mind drifted to Helen again. He hadn't written back to confirm he'd attend the reunion, but he hadn't thrown the envelope away either. Maddie had stopped by the day before, staying a bit longer than usual. She didn't speak much, just sat near Rusty, gently humming while doing her math homework. The dog stayed close but never quite touched her. They were, Earl thought, two souls who knew how it felt to be let down by people they had trusted. Rusty stirred suddenly. His ears perked, his body tense, not with fear, but with alertness. He stood and pointed his head toward the woods beyond the lot. There was a sound, faint, almost imperceptible beneath the hush of morning mist. A high-pitched cry, like something small and scared. A second passed. Then another cry, sharper, desperate. Earl didn't hear it, but Rusty did. The golden retriever stepped cautiously across the gravel, his nose twitching. He paused at the tree line, looked back toward the gas station, toward Earl, and then slipped into the woods, silent as a shadow. The forest behind Birchwood Station wasn't deep, but it was dense. Pines rose in a thick curtain, and the underbrush was damp and tangled. Rusty moved carefully, the dampness soaking into the longer fur of his legs. Birds fluttered away as he passed. A branch cracked under his paw, but he didn't flinch. His ears honed in on the sound, another whimper, now clearer. It came from behind a cluster of fallen logs, half hidden under a curtain of moss. Rusty approached slowly, his breath fogging the air. Beneath the log pile, nestled in a hollow scraped into the soft earth, was a kitten. No more than 5 weeks old. Its fur was dull gray, clumped with mud, and its body trembled with each shallow breath. Eyes half shut and sticky with discharge, it looked up at Rusty with a gaze more instinctual than conscious, a plea wrapped in fear. Rusty froze. Then he lowered himself slowly onto his belly and crept closer, tail still. The kitten hissed weakly, but it had no strength to run. It let out a pitiful mewl that ended in a cough. Rusty nudged it gently with his nose. The kitten barely moved. He looked around. No sign of a mother cat. No nest. Just the sharp cold of October air settling in. Without hesitation, Rusty stepped forward, carefully gripping the kitten by the scruff of its neck, his teeth gentle and deliberate. The kitten dangled limply, legs tucked in, too weak to protest. The walk back was slower. Rusty had to avoid thick brambles and broken branches, and the added weight, though light, made his jaw ache. But he didn't stop. The rain began to pick up again, turning the soil slick and black. The woods grew darker as clouds swelled overhead. At the edge of the tree lean, Earl was just stepping out of the station, wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw the golden blur emerging from the pines, he squinted. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, lowering the rag. "What've you got there?" Rusty padded across the gravel, his head low and steps careful. He reached the porch and set the tiny bundle down onto the folded blanket. The kitten didn't move, save for a faint shiver. Earl crouched. "Is that a kitten?" The answer was written in Rusty's eyes, earnest, pleading. Earl sighed, then disappeared inside the station. He returned moments later with a small towel and a shoebox filled with shredded paper from the old fax machine. He gently dried the kitten, wincing at how cold its paws were. Rusty stood beside him, watching every motion. Earl filled a ceramic bowl with warm milk from the store's tiny fridge and set it near the kitten's head. "Come on, little one. You gotta try." It took effort, but eventually, the kitten opened its eyes. Pale blue, watery, barely alert, but they focused on the bowl. A few seconds passed. Then, with trembling effort, the kitten reached its head forward and began to lap slowly. Rusty's tail wagged once, a small, satisfied motion. He lay down beside the box and rested his head near the kitten, never touching, but always close. "You've got a big heart, don't you?" Earl said softly. "You didn't just wait for someone to come back for you. You went and found someone else who needed saving." He reached over and patted Rusty's head. The dog closed his eyes briefly. Not in submission, but in trust. That afternoon, when Maddie returned, she gasped at the sight of the kitten nestled in the box beside Rusty. She dropped her backpack and immediately dropped to her knees. "Where did this baby come from?" she asked. "He found it," Earl said simply. Rusty lifted his head and gave a soft huff, as if to say, "Of course I did." Maddie looked between the two animals, one big and golden, the other tiny and trembling, and smiled. "He's like a little brother," she said. "We should give him a name." Earl rubbed his chin. "How about Pip?" Maddie grinned. "Pip. That's perfect." The kitten sneezed weakly and curled tighter into the towel. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a slow, steady rhythm tapping against the windows. But inside, beneath the soft glow of the porch light, two animals rested side by side. One had waited for someone to return. The other had never expected to be found. And yet, somehow, they had both ended up exactly where they were meant to be. The sky over Birchwood had begun to lighten in hue, trading its autumn gray for a shy stretch of pale blue. For the first time in days, the sun broke through the thinning clouds, casting long amber rays over the canopy of pines behind the gas station. There was a stillness that morning, a kind of calm that clung to the gravel and pavement like the memory of warmth. Rusty lay curled near the porch with Pip tucked close to his side. The kitten's fur, once matted and dull, had begun to regain a soft sheen of silvery gray. Though still small and underweight, Pip now lifted his head when Maddie called and even batted lazily at the corner of Earl's shoelaces. Rusty had barely left his side, except to eat or briefly pace the edge of the woods. Inside the gas station, Earl Jenkins stood behind the counter, wiping down an old thermos that had survived 5 owners and more than a few falls. He was humming to himself, not a tune with a name, just something half-remembered from his youth. The radio buzzed softly in the background with a country song from the 1970s. The heater clicked gently. Maddie burst in, her cheeks flushed pink from running. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, breathless. "Guess what?" Earl raised an eyebrow, smirking. "You finished your homework before Saturday?" "No, but something better. My mom said she called someone named Helen for you." Earl's expression shifted. The name hung in the air between them like a floating thread. "She did?" he asked. Maddie nodded, hair bouncing. "She said Helen might be coming next weekend. To see the reunion and maybe," she tilted her head, "to see you." Earl cleared his throat and turned away under the pretense of fixing the coffee machine. "That was a long time ago." Maddie shrugged in that effortless way children do when time doesn't hold the same weight. "So? People come back all the time?" Before Earl could answer, the soft chime above the door rang out, a crisp, metallic sound that cut the warm moment clean. 2 figures entered, a man in his 40s with a long dark coat and a woman in a tight red jacket, both glancing around the shop with polite tension. The man's face was lean and angular, his jaw clenched, eyes scanning the room too quickly. The woman had dyed auburn hair pulled into a tight ponytail and a sharp nose that flared when she saw the kitten curled near the porch just beyond the window. "Oh my God," she breathed. "That's him." Rusty stood immediately. His stance wasn't aggressive, but alert, his body slightly angled between the strangers and Pip. Earl stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The man stepped closer to the counter. "We heard you had a kitten. A little gray one. That's our cat. We lost him a few days ago on Route 12. Maddie stepped slightly behind Earl, her brow furrowed. Rusty growled, low and warning. "You got proof of that?" Earl asked. The woman laughed nervously. "He's ours. We've had him since he was born. We didn't bring pictures, but trust me, we'd know him anywhere." Rusty took a step forward, teeth bared now, body low to the ground. He didn't bark, but the message was clear. Earl glanced back at the kitten, now peeking from beneath the blanket. "He was found alone in the woods," Earl said slowly. "Sick, cold, no collar, no chip. Not exactly how you'd expect a loved pet to be found." The man's hand twitched near his jacket. "Look, sir, we're not trying to cause trouble. We just want our kitten." Maddie's voice, quiet but strong, cut through the tension. "Then why didn't you go looking for him?" The woman hesitated, blinking rapidly. "He was found nearly a mile into those woods," Earl added. "If he'd been yours, you'd have heard him crying long before now." The man stepped back, jaw tightening. "You can't just keep someone else's property." "Funny thing," Earl replied. "Animals aren't property when you leave them behind to die." Rusty growled louder now, his body tense and eyes locked on the man. Pip let out a soft mewl from his nest, barely audible but enough to draw everyone's attention. The woman's voice hardened. "You can't prove we abandoned him." "No," Earl said, his gaze unwavering, "but your story's full of holes. And this dog right here?" He risked himself to pull that kitten out of the cold. "He's earned more claim to that little one than either of you." The man's mouth twisted. "We'll be back," he muttered, turning on his heel. The woman lingered for a heartbeat, her gaze flicking from Pip to Rusty, then to Earl. Something unreadable passed across her face. Then she followed her partner out, the bell above the door ringing sharp as they left. Maddie let out a breath. "They're lying." "I know," Earl replied, watching their car disappear down the road. "But something tells me they're not done yet." Rusty relaxed, just barely. He walked to Pip, nudged him gently with his nose, then lay back down beside him. Earl turned to Maddie. "Keep an eye out, all right? If anything ever seems strange around here, you come straight to me." Maddie nodded. "I promise." Outside, the sun finally broke fully through the clouds, casting long warm beams across the station porch. Pip purred weakly, nestled into the blanket. And Rusty, ever watchful, kept his gaze on the road, not out of longing anymore, but out of duty. By the time the sun slipped behind the trees on that fifth day, the air in Birchwood had turned sharp and electric. A thick curtain of clouds rolled in from the west, smothering the last hints of gold on the horizon. The pine branches trembled in anticipation. Inside Birchwood Station, Earl moved with a quiet efficiency, locking windows and propping sandbags by the back door in case the wind picked up. Rusty lay curled beside Pip under the counter, where a folded blanket had become their shared nest. The kitten was stronger now, standing on shaky legs, eating solid food from a shallow ceramic dish. But he still sought warmth from the big golden retriever, pressing close into Rusty's side whenever the wind howled through the walls. Earl flipped the switch on the porch light as the sky darkened to ink. He hadn't seen Maddie or Donna that day, most folks were staying in, expecting a storm. He turned the "open" sign to "closed" and pulled down the blinds. He had just settled behind the counter when headlights swept across the lot. A white sedan. The same one from 2 days before. Earl's hand clenched around his coffee cup. Rusty stood immediately. His muscles tensed, ears pinned, and he stepped in front of Pip. The bell above the door didn't ring, the couple didn't come in. Instead, the door handle jiggled from the outside. It was locked. Earl rose and stepped forward slowly, glancing toward the animals. "Stay," he whispered. The woman's voice came from the other side of the glass. "Open the door. We just want the cat." Earl didn't answer. The man pounded once, hard. "You can't keep him," he snarled. "You're stealing our property." "He's not yours," Earl called out calmly, but firmly. "Leave before I call the sheriff." "We'll take him one way or another," the man hissed. "That dog won't stop us." A crash. Something heavy slammed against the back door. They were trying to break in. Rusty let out a fierce, guttural bark that Earl had never heard before, low and primal. Pip darted under a nearby shelf, trembling. The wind howled louder, slapping the side of the building like a warning. Suddenly, the back door gave way with a sharp crack, the hinges splintering. The man appeared in the hallway, soaked and panting, a metal pole gripped tightly in one hand. His eyes were wild. But Rusty was faster. The Golden lunged, not to bite, but to stand full-bodied in the man's path, tail high, teeth bared. The man froze. The growl that followed was raw and ancient, the sound of loyalty forged in frost and fire. The man raised the pole, but before he could swing, Earl's voice rang out. "Don't move." The old man stood at the end of the hallway, shotgun in hand, pointed but steady. The woman burst in from the front, but stopped dead at the sight of Rusty, blocking her from Pip, who was now behind a crate. "This is your last chance," Earl said. "Drop it and walk away." The man hesitated. Then the metal pole clattered to the floor. From outside, a second set of headlights appeared. A navy blue sedan pulled into the lot, tires skidding slightly in the wet gravel. A door slammed. And then she stepped out. Helen McAllister. She was in her early 60s now, tall and elegant, with shoulder-length silver blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends. She wore a simple beige coat, soaked at the shoulders from the rain, and a blue scarf knotted at her throat. Her eyes, still sea-glass blue after all these years, swept over the scene. Her voice was calm but commanding. "Earl." He blinked. "Helen." She stepped forward, pausing at the door. "Is everything all right?" Earl gestured with a sharp nod. "Not yet. But it will be." The couple backed away slowly, now aware there were witnesses. Rusty didn't move until they were out the door. Then he padded back to Pip and lay beside him, chest rising and falling with slow, protective breaths. By the time the police arrived, called by Helen as she waited in her car, the storm was fully upon them. Rain battered the station in heavy sheets, thunder cracking like a judge's gavel overhead. The officers led the couple away without resistance, murmuring about charges and statements. Earl gave a quiet report, hands steady despite the adrenaline that still hummed beneath his skin. Helen waited inside, standing quietly by the heater with her soaked coat folded over her arm. Her eyes didn't leave Earl once. "I wasn't expecting to walk into all that," she said. Earl chuckled softly. "Didn't plan on it either." She glanced down at Rusty and Pip, now curled together. "You've got yourself a pair of guardians." "I think it's the other way around," Earl replied. There was a pause. Then Helen stepped closer. "I didn't come just for the reunion, Earl." He looked at her, heart thudding. "No." She shook her head. "I wanted to see if the man I remembered still believed in kindness." Earl opened his mouth, but no words came out. Rusty lifted his head, his tail thumping once as if to break the silence. Pip purred softly. Helen smiled. "Seems you do." And just like that, the storm outside began to lessen. The wind softened, the rain slowed to a steady drizzle. Earl turned the heater up a notch, stepped around the counter, and poured her a cup of coffee. He handed it to her with both hands. "Welcome back to Birchwood," he said. The morning after the storm arrived like a gentle exhale across Birchwood. Sunlight filtered through the pines in soft shafts of gold, casting moving shadows across the damp ground. A few birds had returned, chirping carefully, as though testing the air for calm. The puddles along the roadside shimmered with new clarity, and for the first time in nearly a week, the wind carried not warning, but peace. Inside Birchwood Station, the warmth from the old wall heater mingled with the smell of fresh coffee and pine. Earl Jenkins stood at the front window, arms folded loosely across his chest, watching Rusty and Pip through the glass as they lay in their usual place just outside the door. The golden retriever's coat was finally dry, his fur fluffed and full again, glinting like honey in the early light. Pip, once a bundle of bones and dirt, was now a curious, bright-eyed shadow curled against Rusty's side, his tiny tail twitching each time a leaf blew past. Earl glanced over his shoulder at the sound of approaching footsteps. Helen entered the room holding two mismatched mugs, his with a chipped lip, hers with a faded floral print that Diane used to keep for guests. She handed him one with a small smile. "They're already awake," she said, nodding toward the animals. "They always are," Earl replied, his voice lower, more thoughtful. "Like they don't want to miss anything. Like they know something good might finally happen." Helen leaned against the doorframe beside him. "Maybe they've earned it." He looked at her then, really looked. The years had traced soft lines along her cheekbones and the corners of her eyes, but her gaze was still direct, still clear. She met his eyes without hesitation. "You planning to stay long?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Longer than I thought." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as Pip pounced playfully at Rusty's tail and Rusty rolled halfway onto his back in mock protest. Then a car pulled into the lot, followed by another, and then a third. It began slowly, like ripples in water. First came Mrs. Garrison from the library, carrying a basket of muffins and a bag of old toys. Then little Parker and his mother from the elementary school, bringing hand-drawn thank-you cards and a tiny red leash, just in case Pip wants to go on walks. Then came a man from the Birchwood Chronicle, camera in hand, politely asking if he could take a photo of the town's new heroes. By noon, the station porch was filled with visitors. Children crouched beside Rusty, offering treats and affection, while Pip climbed curiously into tote bags and hat brims. Rusty remained composed, accepting the attention with the same quiet dignity that had first drawn Earl's respect. Earl stood to the side, arms crossed, watching as the dogs brought something to this place that hadn't existed in a long time: connection. Strangers were talking to each other. Neighbors were exchanging names. Kindness bloomed like spring in the corners of the lot. Helen moved beside him, slipping her arm through his. "They're not just animals to this town," she said. "They're hope." "Yeah," Earl nodded. "And maybe reminders, too." "Reminders?" "That sometimes the best families are the ones you choose," he murmured. Later that afternoon, a woman from the local animal shelter arrived, Sarah Monroe, mid-30s, with chestnut hair tied up in a messy bun and a clipboard balanced on her forearm. She was pragmatic but kind, her voice firm without being sharp. She'd come to check in, to make sure the animals were safe, healthy, not claimed by anyone else. After a brief examination and a long conversation with Earl, Sarah gave her verdict. "They're bonded. And safe here. If you want to adopt both officially, I'll sign the paperwork right now." Earl didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." When the paperwork was finished, Maddie came by with a notebook in her hands. She held it out shyly. "It's their story," she said. "I wrote it down. In case someone forgets someday." Earl flipped through it, childlike handwriting, doodles of Rusty standing tall beside Pip, and short sentences like, "He was left. But he stayed. And then he saved." He closed the notebook gently. "No one's forgetting." As the sun began to set, the visitors thinned. Rusty and Pip, tired from the attention, nestled under the bench on the porch, where a new bed had been laid for them, handmade by a local craftsman who'd said, "Even heroes need soft places to fall." Helen sat beside Earl in the fading light. Neither spoke. The warmth of her hand in his was enough. A hush settled over the station, deeper and more sacred than silence. It wasn't just the end of a story, it was the beginning of something better. That night, Earl turned off the porch light, then turned it back on again. Just in case someone else out there needed to find their way home. Sometimes, it takes the loyalty of a dog and the cry of a forgotten kitten to remind us what it means to be human. In a world where people are too often left behind, Rusty showed us that love doesn't wait to be rescued, it becomes the rescuer. His story reminds us that even in our loneliest hour, God places us where we are needed most. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, say a prayer for the Rusties and Pips of the world, and remember, He never forgets those who are cast aside. If you believe that every lost soul deserves a second chance, type Amen below.